Hello, everybody. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Paritosh Chauhan. I'm currently pursuing my second year in history from St. Stephen's College, India. I will be speaking on standardization of the Japanese writing system. So let's get started. To understand why Japan had to standardize its writing after 1868, you first have to understand the beautiful chaos that existed before it. Believe it or not, for a long time, Japan had no writing system at all. They had a rich spoken language, but no way to write it down. Everything changed around the 5th century when Chinese characters, which we call kanji, arrived in Japan. But there was a massive problem. Japanese and Chinese are as different as English and Arabic. The grammar simply didn't match. To solve this, the Japanese did something very clever. They created Mayogana. They took Chinese characters and used them strictly for their sounds, ignoring their meaning. Think of it like this. If I wanted to write the word believe in English using this logic, I might draw a picture of a bee and a leaf. I don't care about the insect or the plant. I just want the sounds believe, believe. That is exactly how Japan started writing its own language. Writing this complex Chinese characters just for a single sound was exhausting though. Imagine having to draw 15 strokes just to write the letter A. Over time, two shortcuts evolved. First, there was hiragana, the curvy script. This was developed by noble women in the imperial court who wrote kanji in a very fast, flowing style until the characters became simple shapes. Because women were often excluded from the formal education in serious Chinese, they used hiragana to write the world's first novels and personal diaries. In this slide, you can see kanji in black on top, cursive style mayogana in red, and hiragana in black at the bottom. Second, there was katakana, the sharp script. This was created by Buddhist monk who needed to take notes quickly. Instead of writing the whole character, they just took a small fragment or a corner of it. In this slide, you can see the red highlighting the specific parts of the kanji that evolved into individual katakana character. By the year 1000, Japan had this unique triple thread system: kanji for the main ideas, hiragana for the grammar, and katakana for notes and emphasis. Furthermore, there wasn't just one way to write a sound. There were hundreds of hentai gana. Now, what is it? These are the variant forms of hiragana that people used depending on their personal style or region. By the time we reach the Meiji Restoration in 1868, we have a system that is incredibly artistic but also incredibly messy. Literacy was difficult because there were no set rules on which characters to use or how to spell common words. This brings us to the core of the matter. How did Japan take this ancient, unorganized puzzle and turn it into a standardized tool for a modern nation? Following the Meiji Restoration in 1868, Japan didn't just open its borders to Western ships, it opened its language to a flood of hitherto unfamiliar concepts. Suddenly, there were no words for electricity, culture, or legislation. To solve this, scholars used Chinese characters as building block to create new compounds. However, this created a massive lexical fluctuation. For the word religion, five different terms were being used at the same time in 1876. People were even writing Napoleon as Napoleon and Europe as Europa using complex Chinese characters just for their sounds. Imagine having to memorize a 20 stroke character just to write the name of a city. The system was reaching a breaking point. How could a modern nation function if its people couldn't even agree on how to write the word train? The first phase of reform were radical. In 1866, Meijima Hisoka, a translator at the Bureau for Development, sent a daring petition to the shogun titled Kanji Rohashinogi, or Proposal for Abolition of Chinese Characters. He argued that the average primary school child wasted at least 3 years just memorizing symbols. To prove it was feasible to write entirely in phonetic script, Maejima set up the Keimosha Company in 1873 and published an all Kana newspaper, the Mainichi Hiragana Shimbun. By 1883, several groups amalgamated into the Kana Club to push this movement forward. Others went even further. In 1869, Nanbu Yoshikazu called for a Romanized script, and by 1885, the Romaji Kai or Romanization Club was formed. Now, what is Romaji? Well, it is the method of writing Japanese words using the Latin alphabet instead of traditional Japanese characters. For example, on the slide you can see this character in hiragana is written in Latin script as sushi, which allows everyone to recognize a word for the popular Japanese dish. They published a bulletin called Roman Dashi, but they were plagued by internal fights over which style to use. Because of this infighting and a rising tide of nationalism, the club collapsed by 1892. The biggest move came in 1900 when the Ministry of Education issued regulations to simplify primary education. They standardized a limited number of kana signs and kept characters at 1200. They also tried to change historical kana usage to match actual pronunciation. However, this was a disaster because they only changed the rules for Chinese styled words, leaving native Japanese words in the old style. In 1908, the government was forced to drop these regulations. After World War I, a new spirit of democracy arrived. In 1921, major newspapers like the Asahi and Mainichi issued a joint statement advocating for a restriction on characters to make news accessible to everyone. That same year, the Interim Committee on the National Language was established. By May 1923, they produced the Joyo Kanjihyo, a list of characters for general use. The newspapers planned to adopt this list on September 1st, 1923, but that was the day of the Great Kanto earthquake. The resultant chaos postponed the reforms for years. By 1931, the Manchurian incident occurred and the mood shifted toward nationalism. The military reported on the conflict using very difficult formal style, making it impossible to stick to a limited character list. This leads us to a fascinating clash between reform and the national polity. In the mid 1930s, the education minister Hirao Hachisaburo was a supporter of abolishing kanji. He was attacked in the Diet, which can be loosely understood as Japanese Assembly or Japanese Parliament by critics who argued that changing the script would mean changing the imperial rescripts, the emperor's holy decrees. They argued that writing and thought were inseparable. To change the script was to disrespect the emperor. By 1938, the council had to compromise, creating two categories: one set of simple characters for school books and formal versions to be used only for imperial documents. By the 1940s, the complexity of the script became a matter of life and death. The army was drafting recruits with lower education levels who literally could not read the names of the weapons they were using. This caused a series of accidents. Out of sheer necessity, the War Department issued a directive in February 1940 called Regulations Relating to the Simplification of Weapon Nomenclature, restricting characters to just 1235 so soldiers wouldn't hurt themselves. By 1945, Japan was left with an intricate, confusing system that had failed to reform despite 80 years of effort. It took the total devastation of the war to finally break the deadlock. Following the defeat in 1945, Japan underwent a dramatic orthographic revolution. The post war leadership recognized that the complex pre war script, heavily associated with ultranationalism, was a barrier to rebuilding a democratic nation. The turning point came in November 1946 when the cabinet promulgated two landmark reforms: the Toyo kanji list and modern kana usage, Gendai Kanazukai. The Toyo kanji list limited characters for general use to 1850 signs, aiming to make literacy accessible to the masses. Simultaneously, kana usage was modernized to match actual pronunciation. Between 1948 and 1949, further standardization followed. The Toyo Kanji Onkun list regulated readings, while the forms list officially simplified the physical shapes of characters known as Shinji-tai. For instance, the traditional complex character for country, which in Japanese is called as okuni or kuni, which you can see on your left, was simplified to its current modern form, which you can see on the slide in right. Now, recognizing that names required more variety, the Jinmyo kanji list was introduced in 1951 to allow more flexibility for personal names. By the 1970s, the restrictive nature of these post war limits began to feel too tight for modern expression. This led to a shift in philosophy, moving from restriction to guidance. In October 1981, the Joyo kanji list of 1945 characters replaced the Toyo list. The crucial change here was the concept of Meyasu or a guide. This meant the list was no longer a rigid law but a recommendation for clear communication. Now you can see on the slide the present number of Toyo kanji is 2136 in 2010. As we moved into the digital age, technology became the primary driver of change. The adoption of Japan Industrial Standard (JIS) in 1978 encoded thousands of characters, and the invention of the Japanese word processor revolutionized text production. This allowed for the transcriptive input method, where users type in kana and the machine suggests the correct kanji. Finally, we see a shift in the physical orientation of the script, while the traditional vertical style known as tate-gaki, which you can see in the slide on right, is still preserved in literature and newspapers. The horizontal style called yoko-gaki, which you can see in the slide on the left, has become the standard for technical, official, and academic work. This evolution from 1945 to today shows a writing system that has successfully balanced its deep cultural heritage with the practical demands of a modern technological society. Thank you. If you have any clarifications, do comment down below. It would be a pleasure to read all. Thank you.